let's move over to the Philadelphia Eagles. So on the offensive side, they go from really a Nick Sirianni offense to a Kellen Moore offense. It really seems like Kellen Moore has full control there. He did a show with our good buddy Shil Kapadi on the Ringers Philly special that came out on Tuesday, just talking about, what's this offense going to look like with Kellen Moore. Moore as a coordinator, he is really multiple. He's been a part of top-end offenses in Dallas. He's going to have them finally using motion. We'll see a sprinkle of under center. They should have some more RPO creativity that they missed after Shane Steichen left, and they should have better answers against the blitz, but they're going to end up putting a lot on Jalen Hurts' plate this year, where last year you have Kelsey who was able to handle so much of the protections for a good reason. I don't think that was necessarily saying, hey, Jalen Hurts can't do this, but yeah, you have a Hall of Fame center, let him take care of business. But I do think this actually raises Hurts' ceiling, but it could also lower his floor at times. I think it's going to take a bit just to get kind of into rhythm. I want to see early on with this offense, are they behind on time of the play clock? And are they, you add all those shifts in motion, that changes how the operation works. That can lead to some delayed games. Obviously, I think Tej, both of us are advocates. Just take those 5 yards, save that timeout for another time. Where do you think you want to start over here with this new look Kellen Moore offense in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I definitely encourage everyone to listen to your show with Shil Kapadi. Some of the best Eagles content out there that you can find. First episode was like an hour and 45 minutes. So also encourage people to listen to it on 1.5 speed if you have other stuff to do, because it's a long episode, but it's really, really good content in there. And I think that you brought up so many good points about the Eagles right here and also on that podcast, where you do lose Jason Kelsey, who is a perennial all-pro center, like you mentioned. And I do think that some of the concerns about the Eagles offense are still being overstated despite that. Like, when you have a good quarterback and 2 great receivers, it should mean that you have a good offense, kind of no matter what else is happening around you. And I think that you really do have a good quarterback in Jalen Hurts, who ranked 6th in EPA per play last year in an offense where they had no motion. He might not have been healthy at 100% at all times. So he was still able to overcome a lot and put up decent production last year. We know that both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are really good. And I think Devontae Smith might be in for a massive year because of his role in the slot and what that has meant in the Kellen Moore offense in the past, where we've seen big jumps for Keenan Allen and CeeDee Lamb. And then you bring in someone like Saquon Barkley, who is still relatively dynamic as a rusher and is going from an offensive line that was giving him almost nothing before contact to an offensive line that should give him a lot before contact. And I really think that he can take advantage of that as well.
And, thinking about Kellen Moore, with all these tools, he has so many tools at his disposal, because I probably wouldn't put him in the top 10 offensive coordinator rankings right now, but getting a lot of great ingredients. You throw a little seasoning on it, you make something great. We don't have to evaluate him in isolation away from all of this. And I do think a lot is going to be seen. You mentioned Hurts. It's going to be seen. Does he want to check the ball down? Because most of these quarterbacks that are mobile, the scramble is a check down, and that's totally fine. I think that the talks of Saquon Barkley as a receiver are probably overstated. He's not going to lead the running backs in receptions. Obviously, like, there's one guy who does that. It's Christian McCaffrey. And I do want to see, how much is Jalen Hurts willing to throw over the middle of the field, where Philly has such great beat reporters. They put out such good stuff. Tim McManus had this great article for ESPN talking about the Hurts-Sirianni relationship. And it seems like Hurts just wants answers. And I think those answers are going to be there. And now it's going to be seen. Are you going to throw over the middle of the field? Are you going to throw that quick in-breaker against pressure, where you have a few more answers to that test? Tej, I do want to mention they're at right guard this year. They're probably it seems like Mekhi Becton is going to be the starter there, bumping from tackle to guard. Of course, you got health issues. And then, of course, they're missing Kelsey as they move on to Cam Jurgens at that center spot. I wanted to ask you real quick. So there are so many good defensive tackles in the league now, so many good players and so many good teams that are good at moving their best rushers inside. Of course, we do the offensive line as a weak link system. If you're going to look at the Eagles' weak link, probably going to look at that right guard. You're not going to be wanting to rush guys over Lane Johnson all the time. How far away do you think we are from saying that guards are maybe not more valuable than tackles, but are at least maybe as valuable as tackles kind of in isolation?
Yeah, I don't know if they'll necessarily be more valuable than tackles, but it does seem like the market thinks that the gap between tackles and guards is closing based on the free agency moves that happened this offseason. We had talked before on the show about how offensive guard is one of those positions that moves a lot in free agency. It's usually a position where you kind of want it to fill some sort of need, and not every team is necessarily in the right spot at their timeline to fill that position. So teams will often let high end offensive guards walk, and then other teams will want offensive guards to maybe close their weak link system and make sure that they don't have one, and bring that offensive guard in. But there were so many offensive guards this season that got paid high end money. And I do think that is a response to all the defensive tackle talent that you mentioned. So it's definitely closing as we get further and further. But I still do think that there'll be an offensive tackle and offensive guard gap in terms of like APY and payment.
Yeah, I think I'm on that side of it. I think that's probably going to be right over time, even though, yeah, the offensive guards are seen as more important because the pass rushers are so good on the inside. Before we get to the defense stage, real quick, I'm just so in on Devonta Smith. I love him as a route runner. I love that he like looks physically different than all the other players. You know, that this guy's obviously incredibly strong, incredibly fast, incredibly athletic. But Tej, if we were to look like NFL players, you know, we would look like Devonta Smith. I do think that's important. I think that there is a world where Devonta Smith has just a more productive year than AJ Brown, specifically because of Kellen Moore loves the slot. He really does. And I think Hurts likes throwing that outside ball. I'm hoping that we could just see a ton of Devonta Smith running that choice route from the slot, really get to route defenders up. How ridiculous is that from a potential outcome standpoint? I'm not saying that Devonta Smith is better than AJ Brown, or I would take him just over AJ Brown from like a 1-versus-1 perspective. But defenses are going to roll coverage to AJ Brown. They should. And I think that now the Eagles are a team that just gets the most too high looks all the time. Hopefully that changes. But then also, you know, you now have an offensive coordinator that I think is more happy to attack that slot position.
That is a spicy take, but I could see Devonta Smith outproducing AJ Brown this year. I think that when you look at the Eagles offense last year, when they were facing man coverage, their default kind of decision was to just throw to AJ Brown. He had the highest target share in the league against man. And I think that it was a little bit of a tell at the end of the season, especially in some of those games that they lost, towards the back half of last year, where teams were able to kind of key in that they were going to go to AJ Brown if they were able to give certain looks. And I even think against the blitz, and especially all the zero blitz that they saw last year, like teams felt confident about where they kind of knew where the ball was going to go. So Kellen Moore just has to have answers for that this year. And one of the answers will probably be using Devonta Smith out of the slot. And we know how productive he can be when he's used correctly. So I am definitely excited for that. So I'll put like a 30% chance that Devonta Smith outproduces AJ Brown this year on your take.
Well, there we go. That's not 10. So I like where we're at. That maybe it's not the spiciest take that has ever happened. Well, yeah, we don't have to have the spiciest takes. I do think the AJ Brown thing, like, I mean, you can know where the ball is going. It's going to go to him. And the best thing about AJ Brown is a lot of times that's fine. So I do wonder, maybe I didn't think about that as much, where of course, I mean, force feed the guy because he's one of the best receivers in the league. And then just closing up there. Yeah. If I'm a defense, blitz these guys until they prove it. I need to see on Eagles film them being able to deal with the blitz. They have not proved it yet. We're going to find out pretty early. The Packers in week 1, that defensive front is going to want to attack you. They get the Buccaneers thing in week 4, bye week, then the Browns in week 6. So we're going to see pretty early in the season. Do these guys have answers? And, I certainly hope that they do. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball, where our good friend, Vic Fangio, is now the defensive coordinator there. But a lot of change in that secondary room. Tej, where do you want to start with the Eagles defense?
I don't know if Fangio will ever show it on his face, but I'm sure that he's excited to work with the new defensive backs that they've brought in to let him cook a little bit on defense. I think that one of the sneaky underrated signings was signing Isaiah Rodgers, last offseason when he had to sit out last year due to his suspension. And he was about a league average corner in 2021. In 2022, he played less coverage snaps, but he only allowed 125 yards in coverage on around 280 coverage snaps the entire year, which was just elite level cornerback play. So he's probably in between what he was in 2021 and 2022 with taking the year off and getting acclimated to NFL speed again. But he should be a big part of this Eagles defense this year, especially later into the season. And then you look at what they did in the draft with Kenyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, where you draft both of these guys in back-to-back rounds, and you bring in Mitchell, who had a very, very high athletic score, is really good in man coverage, plays with good speed, good agility, and was the best corner in all of college last year in terms of EPA when targeted, and did a great job at lining up at outside corner and defending his opposing receivers. Then you have Cooper DeJean, who is this kind of player where he can play zone well. He can also contribute a little bit on special teams, and he can really just move around your defense and just be a great tackler and someone who can play in a diverse set of alignments. And so all of these guys together, I think, is going to provide a huge upgrade over what they were throwing out last year at defensive back. And I still think that Darius Slay could have some bounce back there as well. So you have really four guys that can really play corner for you this year that you can feel better about what you had last year.
Yeah, a really interesting one, like year-to-year jump for the secondary. Of course, you're relying on rookies now, and that, like we're saying, we always got to temper expectations for rookies. But Quinyon Mitchell at the draft, just kind of asking him, hey, you're going to be asked to play all these roles. He just looks me dead in the eyes and is like, whatever they ask, I'll do it. And that seems like it's been true, where he's been asked to play in the slot a little bit, where certainly he's going to end up on the outside eventually. It just depends on, I think, how they look at their kind of best three between the two cornerbacks and the nickel, where they're going to be a nickel just like a ton of time, because that's obviously the modern NFL. And then DeJean, I think we'll probably see him play in the preseason for the first time. He's obviously getting back from the injury, where, when rookies face those injuries early on, that always scares me, because you are falling behind and those injuries are able to pop up later. But certainly I'm rooting for DeJean there, where I do wonder what the final three cornerbacks and the two safeties is going to look like in Philadelphia, because it might just be because I'm like looking at these names all the time and just forcing myself to buy, not even forcing myself, I just am buying into it, where if you have Johnson and Blankenship in the back, or maybe even Avonte Maddox is the second safety there, and then you have Mitchell on the outside, eventually Slay on the outside, DeJean in the slot. But yeah, the Isaiah Rodgers thing, I'm trying to be better this year about, the guys that I really like. Obviously, we like Howie Roseman and a lot of things he's done, and I feel like I give him the benefit of the doubt to start. I think the Isaiah Rodgers move is one that just deserves praise, to essentially stash him on your roster in that way, and it can pay dividends where now you have depth. Where you mentioned Darius Slay, who Duke can still play, but that cornerback cliff is coming. I think he knows that, and when it's there, it is there. And then also on the, why do we have to praise Howie Roseman? The defensive line moves to essentially, you trade away Reddick after you sign Bryce Huff. It certainly looks like that is a positive, where I think the winner of that and kind of all of the unfortunate drama for the Jets is Bryce Huff, because it feels like the expectation is a little bit lowered. But thinking about Huff specifically, obviously you got Jalen Carter on a defensive line that can really be a force here. How do we project Huff, where he's a player who just absolutely dominated in a role? He wasn't just a third down player, but his production came as a pass rusher on third downs, and certainly that is what he is really being paid for in Philadelphia. But his role is going to expand. So maybe how do you approach it a little bit when you have a player that was dominant in one role, now they're expanding that role a little bit?
It's a really good question. I think that when you look at Bryce Huff and how he was a designated pass rusher last season and had a very, very high pressure rate, was really good in this role relative to other DPRs, you still will project his pressure rate to come down this year on an increased amount of snaps, just because he has more things to worry about. He has to worry about the run. He's also just going to be playing more and that physical toll on his body. But I still think that he'll be pretty productive in this defense, because he still had the same amount of pressures, in terms of the volume number as Hassan Reddick did last year, despite playing a lot less snaps. So as long as he kind of gets close to that pressure number this year, you're kind of replicating what Reddick was able to do last year from a pass rushing perspective. And then you're also hoping that because of the coaching that he's getting and the work that he's putting in himself, that his run defense is going to get to the level where he can be on the field for 3 downs at a time.
Yes, I do think Fangio likes those kind of bigger bodied edge players that are able to kind of set the edge. You think like Khalil Mack in that spot, turn that run back inside. The Fangio defense, it takes time for it to settle in sometimes. So I do kind of just wonder, are there early season hurdles? Is the talent, particularly Jalen Carter, like that guy's got defensive player of the year potential in my mind, certainly.